Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. Seeing or hearing encrypted messages from a real animal is rare. Not only humans can be interacted with, and not every animal is vulnerable. My grandmother told me about this, which my aunt later confirmed. I trust them now. This was about a decade before the infamous song, but there was talk of werewolves or wolves in Appalachia. My aunt and grandmother always called it a wolf. My grandparents' home is in western Grayson County, Virginia, which is sparsely populated outside of one or two large towns on the east side. Back then, it was even less so, with thick forest and hilly terrain in all directions. You must follow a dirt path for half a mile to a gravel side road, then drive 30 minutes to a small town just across the North Carolina border. Shortly north, you'll reach the Blue Ridge Parkway and Appalachian Mountains. The forest is mostly low-lying shrubs with pine and black oak trees in the canopy. There's a fish-filled stream 30 yards from the house. Wild blackberries, tender leaf shrubs, and apple trees make it wildlife friendly. Old two-story house built on a hill overlooking it. The 1970s. My aunt thinks it was 1978, when she graduated high school. My father graduated and joined the Air Force. Although he was old enough to retire, my grandfather liked to stay busy. Because he was getting old, he worked as an electrician and power pole technician as an advisor. He just got the North Carolina contract. He was gone for 1.5 weeks. Only my 17-year-old aunt and grandmother remained. As I said, there was often wildlife. My grandmother's typical morning included making breakfast and watching deer and rabbits eat shrubbery. She sometimes saw a bobcat, fox, or coyote. A mountain lion and her cubs once passed the house. She knew a large black bear with a white chest patch and a hole in his left ear. My grandmother called him Captain because he sat on his haunches and reached up with his paws to pick apples, looking like he was saluting. He was a big, black bear but wasn't aggressive unless tested. If my grandparents left him alone, he'd leave them alone. He strolled by the house to eat blackberries on the bushes or fallen apples because he was too big to climb trees and the fruit trees around the house were low enough for him to reach. My grandfather estimated he was 500 to 600 pounds and 6 feet tall. My grandfather measured weekday tree scratches. My grandmother noticed an animal decline. In late summer during a wet season, most plants were blooming and the leaves were tender. She didn't see rabbits or deer grazing a coyote. The nightly yapping she'd heard vanished. Some neighbors, people within 5 miles, told her something took their dog and smashed their chicken coop. They assumed a nearby mountain lion did it. It was the only thing that could have taken down a large farm dog, because they saw Captain, the only other predator nearby big enough to take down an 80-pound farm dog, gorging himself on a dead deer the day after. They didn't find anything. My aunt woke up my grandmother the next night to report hearing something hit her wall. The next morning, they found one of the deer butchered with a bloody smear on the wall. The deer was walking by the house when it was ambushed and hit the wall. My grandmother grew up in the woods and knew how predators kill. Mountain lions jump on the back, rake their claws across the flanks, and bite the neck. Black bears bite the head while breaking the neck or back, and coyotes rarely attack deer. They bite the inner leg and twist to rip muscle and arteries. There were no claw marks and the bite looked closer than a cougar's. She also ganned. From the way the ground had been disturbed, there was only one predator, which didn't make sense for coyotes as they usually hunted in pairs and one alone isn't enough to kill a full-grown deer and dispose of the carcass. The next few nights were uneventful, except that my aunt or grandmother were woken up by panting outside. In these woods, you can hear a pin drop if you're close, and they swore the panting animal was outside the wall. My grandmother was picking berries when she saw large dog tracks in a mud flat along a nearby stream. She thought it might be the missing farm dog who had run away. She followed the tracks until something across the stream growled at her. She looked up to see a large, bulky, brown coyote or wolf in a thicket across the stream. She quickly retreated, looking back only to check her footing on the stream bank. When she looked back, she saw the dog's face in greater detail because it had moved out from under cover, not out of the leaves. She noticed it was standing on its hind legs and peering over the shrubs. She'd seen canines stand before dogs. Coyotes and foxes do it. Size surprised her. Her head barely reached the top of the same thicket of bushes the other day. She was 53. This thing had its head pitched over the shrubs for extra visibility, and when a predator doesn't try to hide, it's usually intimidating someone. My grandmother backed up the hill without turning around, and the creature emerged on its hind legs. It strolled forward in a way she couldn't describe, but she insisted it never went back down on all fours. Needless to say, she ran back to the house when they heard panting, a distant howl, and scraping sounds. Garage door, back door frame, kitchen window frame were found. Something had clawed them all. My grandmother and neighbors saw the dog-like creature several times during the week, usually on or near our property. My aunt saw fuzzy ears outside her window and realized what it was. She wasn't startled because Captain had come by her window before and she'd lost some fear of him, but this time his ears barely reached the window sill, whereas you could see them on his head. Because of its pointed shape, brown color, and intact ears, she knew it wasn't the bear. They also detected a pungent smell on a side door porch and found what looked like urinal or other liquid stains, suggesting an animal claimed the spot. It all came to a head on Wednesday night when they heard howling in the distance. My grandmother turned on a porch light and saw the dog sprinting across the lawn on its hind legs, confirming how big it was. She had seen timber wolves at the zoo up to 150 pounds and was sure this was at least twice that size. They could hear it roaming the property and pressing against doors like it was trying to get in. They saw yellow eyes and broad, long-fingered paws at the windows. No one could immediately call the police before cell phones and 24-hour service in some rural areas. My grandmother had to wait minutes on a dial-up line to call the police station 2 towns away. My aunt screaming and running for a gun distracted her. She was in the living room when she heard clicking and saw the wolf pressing its face and teeth against the glass with its claws outstretched. Both started grabbing rifles or shotguns. It was becoming increasingly clear. The creature tried to get in while they were inside. They heard it panting through a wall before heavy footsteps, a loud thump, and a flash of fur on the window. They ran to the back. Guns in the pantry locker. They heard a commotion outside. It wasn't like in the movies, where creatures roar, snarl, and hiss constantly. My aunt and grandmother didn't know what was happening, and didn't investigate until the next morning, but they could tell something was antagonizing something because they heard grunts, barks, and rumbles for about a minute before they faded away. No bodies were found, but there was a fierce fight. Multiple places were ripped up. The wall was dented, and grass and dirt had oxidized blood traces. My mother found a trail where something charged the shrubs and dog prints and wider tracks moving in the same direction. The animals returned by the end of the week, and my grandfather, his aunt, and some neighbors surveyed the area to look for the wolf creature. The neighbors heard nighttime howls that stopped recently. Not found? Despite surveying the entire property, they found a trackway leading into the mountains. Several days later, My grandmother saw Captain marking his territory by scratching a tree in their yard. He had cuts on his muzzle, missing fur, heel bite wounds on his arm, and a torn ear. He lost half of his ear flap, but other than that, he recovered. Okay. My aunt joked that he looked proud when told about the urine-like smell. When the wolf creature was running amok, my grandfather thought it was claiming territory. Usually, Captain, a docile black bear, became aggressive when a newcomer invaded his space. My grandmother and aunt heard the bear charging while distracted and engaging the intruder, while the wolf-looking creature was taller, skinnier, and less massive, and apparently in a confrontation and threat displays that likely followed sheer bulk. Apparently, it decided it wasn't worth claiming this spot if it meant having to square off with a quarter-ton of claws and teeth for it. Captain ran off the intruder to protect his territory, and helped my family to recover his strength. My grandmother trimmed the apple trees to remove all the fruit, but she didn't feed the bear. Didn't want to eat humans. She wanted him to fatten up so he could stick around for the next year, just in case. Decades have passed, and while my grandparents and Captain have died, the Dogman creature never returned. Since Captain, 3 black bears have moved in and grown about as big as him. That seemed to deter any large dogs. Since, my aunt gave me more details. A few days before the fight, neighbors heard a loud ruckus in the forest near their small farm. The wolf creature was howling again, and their surviving dog would bark or howl back, only to hear the wolf howl get closer. Then they heard a loud boom from the nearby hills. My aunt heard the same racket for years. She didn't realize it until she saw a trained black bear roar on cue. Black bears rarely roar but can. House and bellowing stopped. After a few more calls. A few days before the wolf creature attacked the house, Captain may have been patrolling his territory.